I want to spend some time talking to you today about Ukraine, although I don't want to, as you've noticed, spend a lot of the show on it because I do think that there is a bit of a media obsession with this, with constantly putting this on TV and not really advancing the story. Although we know there's a conflict going on in Ukraine, it will continue on. We should know about it. We should be aware of how serious everything is over there. And there should be a discussion, as we've done here, I think. We speak about it, but we don't only speak about that issue because we still have a border and an economy and inflation and other things and, cultural battles to fight here at home. And there's a lot going on, which I don't think has been certainly reflected by the Democrat media because I think they like this narrative they've constructed as they're all heroes on the Ukraine issue. Meanwhile, Republicans have overwhelmingly gone along with sending weapons to the Ukrainians, are rooting for Ukrainians to achieve their sovereignty and independence back from the Russian aggressors. But that somehow gets lost. We hear about the Putin-supporting Republicans. I don't know any Putin-supporting Republicans. I don't know why people say this. I haven't come across this. Maybe they exist, but they're certainly not prominent. They're not people that anyone is listening to. But, they slander some of the folks over at Fox and say that they're doing Putin's bidding. It's just simply idiotic. Speaking of idiotic, though, Nancy Pelosi, I don't think we played it. There was a couple days ago where she was,
I saw the big convoy of the tanks. I want to blow the tanks up.
She was like General Pelosi all of a sudden, El Comandante Pelosi.
Send in the bombers and to bomb them.
We're like, whoa, Nancy. Settle down. I don't think America should start bombing Russian tank convoys unless you want really big problems that may actually affect her in her $10 million mansion in San Francisco. It may actually, if we go to full-scale nuclear war, the libs will suffer too, so I think Nancy should be aware of that. And maybe she is, because she scaled it down a little bit from,
I want to bomb them,
to reading a... It's almost hard to read this, seriously. Reading a poem out loud yesterday on St. Patrick's Day, written by Bono, who, look, I listened to quite a bit of U2 in the 90s. I cannot tell a lie. I liked some of the U2 albums. I celebrate most of the catalog. But Bono is obviously a little bit of a megalomaniac, right? A little bit of a God complex. But anyway, he wrote a poem. He wrote a poem and about the Ukraine situation, mind you. And Nancy Pelosi chose to read it, I guess, in an act of solidarity. James Joyce, Keats, name some of the great writers, the great poets of your high school studies or whatever it is you decide to read literature. I don't think Bono is on the list. Here's Nancy Pelosi reading it. 8.
Oh, St. Patrick, he drove out the snakes with his prayers, but that's not all it takes. For the smoke symbolizes an evil that arises and hides in your heart as it breaks. And the evil risen from the darkness that lives in some men, but in sorrow and fear, that's when saints can appear, to drive out those old snakes once again. And they struggle for us to be free from the psycho in this human family. Ireland's sorrow and pain is now the Ukraine, and St. Patrick's name is now Zelensky.
Wow. If you held, I know there's some teachers listening to this, a lot of parents listening to this show all across the country. Your third grader could write a better poem. That is true. Your third grade, maybe second graders could write a better poem, but that was what Pelosi decided she was going to share with all of us. And then there was another effort at this, and I have to wonder how much of it is this really meant for the consumption of the Russian soldiers and the Russian people. Today, Putin just had a major rally. He had a World Cup stadium full of people, and he's talking about, look, he's a propagandist. He's a bad guy. This is not new. This is not surprising. Putin's a bad guy, has been for a very long time. But he is saying This was to mark the 8th anniversary of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea back in 2014. And so you have a big essentially a big pro-war event. Now, I know they'll say it's a lot of government employees and people bust in and all this, but Putin is not backing down from this at all. And I know everyone keeps saying, oh, but he's lost so many soldiers. And look at Russian military doctrine for the last 100 years. Loss of soldiers is not something that bothers the conscience, unfortunately, of the leadership class in an authoritarian state like Russia or the former Soviet Union. So that's not going to do it. So how do we manage the situation right now? What can be done on our side? I think I've mentioned you all before. I have two brothers, and we grew up watching just a lot of the classic 80s and some 90s action movies. But Schwarzenegger, Stallone, I watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I mean, I still think Bloodsport is an amazing cinematic achievement for those of you who have not seen it. It holds up well. I feel like they made it with a budget that you couldn't even buy an entry-level Tesla, but they made the movie for very little money. Anyway, I loved action movies growing up and watched them with frequency. I could, if you were to see me on the street and quote the movie Commando or Predator, for example, I could respond with the next line almost 100% of the time. So I was a Schwarzenegger guy. I mean, it's an amazing story, but I really thought his work was, look, he's a cultural phenomenon in some way. And he was the governor of California. He became the governor, right? He became a politician. He's somebody who's been in a leadership role too. So he puts out this video, and I think the video, it's well-intentioned. I actually agree with the overall message of the Russians are fighting an aggressive war that should stop immediately, should never have occurred. But then he does this, and I am sorry, but we can't allow this to continue where the narrative of the left, of the elites, is that the war in Ukraine is, almost like the January 6th insurrection in terms of how serious this was and how much of a threat to democracy it was.
No one likes to hear something critical of the government. I understand that. But as a longtime friend of the Russian people, I hope that you will hear what I have to say. And may I remind you that I speak with the same heartfelt concern as I spoke to the American people when there was an attempted insurrection on January 6th last year, when a wild crowd was storming the U.S. Capitol, trying to overthrow our government. You see, there are moments like this that are so wrong, and then we have to speak up. And this is exactly the same with your government.
No, I'm sorry. Anyone who calls the January 6th riot an insurrection to overthrow the United States government by force is either an idiot or a liar. I stand behind this. I've written about this. I've posted this at bucksexton.com a while ago, and a lot of people were saying, yeah, absolutely. This is a case where you say you cannot allow this narrative to continue because it dramatically, that undermines everything else. It was a 9-minute long video he puts out, and to get the libs to know that, Arnold is on their side, he does this, I spoke out against the insurrection, another serious threat to our democracy. Putin has rolled a couple of 100,000 soldiers into Ukraine and is firing tanks and missiles at hospitals and killing thousands and thousands of people. The January 6th insurrection was not an insurrection. It was people that were violating trespassing laws and interfering and obstructing with a government proceeding overwhelmingly in terms of the overall numbers, non-violently. And those who were violent didn't actually kill anybody. In fact, as we know, the only fatality was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by an officer who pulled the trigger far too quickly, in my opinion. But you see, even when we could have a moment of unity, you can't be in the good graces of the left without taking a cheap shot at the GOP, at Trump voters. This is where you'd say, why not actually just bring us all together and have a unified message of support for the Ukrainian people? No, Schwarzenegger takes a cheap shot at the insurrection. Or maybe he just believes it. Maybe he's so simple-minded and is thinking about politics. I mean, his tenure as governor of California was not good, that he actually thinks what he says is true.